Hi, this video actually comes from Patreon. As a lot of you may or may not know, I have a Patreon, and in the top tier, you get to pick a video for me to do once a month. I don't know why my hand has been flowing so much in my videos recently, but today, we're gonna talk about Zelda. Thank you, Casey, for the question. Let's get started. I absolutely adore Zelda. I grew up on Zelda. I have a deep-seated love for Zelda that almost goes into a borderline obsession about Zelda. I have standees, I have posters, I have merch, I have trinkets, I have statues, I have almost all the video games. I say almost because I'm really cheap and I haven't bought all the ones that I want yet. And I have them in NTSC, and I have them in PAL, and I have variant labels, and it goes a little bit out of control. Between my collection here in Canada and my collection in Australia, Zelda is a reoccurring theme. Zelda makes up most of my collection. So why do I have such a love for Zelda? What is it beyond just really enjoying the games that makes me borderline obsessed with this series? It actually goes back to my childhood, and it goes into a dark place, which I will talk about today and try and keep it as light and fresh as possible, because most of my experiences with Zelda is definitely light, fun, and it just brings me back to the feeling of happiness. I need water because I'm dehydrated, and the last time I got dehydrated, I passed out and wound up in the hospital, and I said pass instead of pass. I'm goddamn American now. So where did my love for Zelda begin? Well, as a lot of you know, I grew up on the NES. When I was born, my parents had an NES in the house. I was born in 1990, and I grew up with an NES. There was always one around, and there was always a bunch of games for it. Maniac Mansion being what I'm pretty sure is the first game I ever played. Something they didn't have though was Legend of Zelda, which is weird. We had Mario Brothers, we had Maniac Mansion, we had a lot of the standard games that everyone seemed to have, but Zelda wasn't one of them. And then I remember my mom knew how much both me and my brother adored the NES, so she ended up buying us a Super Nintendo when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And I remember playing Donkey Kong and Mega Man X, and you guys are gonna hate me right now. Especially those of you in Australia who know how expensive Mega Man X is in Australia. It's like over $100. I didn't like either of them. Let me explain myself. I don't know, I never really got into it as a kid, and I think it was because I loved the NES and I was so young, and I just wasn't ready for big flashy colors, big flashy 16-bit graphics. I just really wasn't into it at the time. I really liked the almost slower paced old school 8-bit NES games, and I really wasn't into it. So we ended up giving the Super Nintendo to my grandma because she wanted to get into some video games. She actually liked playing Tetris on it was just a little thing made for Tetris. If you've seen those, I actually had one growing up. I had a lot of fun with it. So I missed out on anything Super Nintendo growing up, which is why I actually I collect Super Nintendo now, finally, at the age of 26 years old, but I never really played it or collect for it. I really had any experience with Super Nintendo growing up. I went back to NES. I bought more games for NES, but I never heard about Legend of Zelda. I never subscribed to any magazines. I didn't have the internet back then. I barely even had a working computer. I think I got a computer when I was like 14, 15 years old. I got my first PC. So I never even heard about this game called Legend of Zelda. I didn't have any friends at school that played the NES. Everyone at school played Sega, because it was so dominated in Australia. It was Sega. But finally at the age of probably about 13, I had saved up some pocket money. I had just started working my first job at Burger King, known as Hungry Jack's in Australia. I had a little bit of cash in my pocket. I had $20 in my pocket, and I was ready. I was ready to go out and buy a 64, and I think at the time I must have spent like 60 bucks, I think. It had to be 60 bucks. Just on the system itself. But I needed a game for it, and I was in the store, and just like you do back then, my mom asked, well, what game would be good for him to play? What game is good for a 13, 14-year-old kid? And bless the gentleman's heart. Bless that Blockbuster employee, or wherever actually, I think it was Game Traders back then. Bless the Game Traders employee's heart. He said, I think he'll enjoy Zelda. Let's take a ride. Let's take a ride back to Nostalgia Town. And I know a lot of you probably know what this is like or remember what this was like, but growing up for 13 years, playing pretty much exclusively NES games and a lot of DOS games as well. And then finally, without even realize what you're getting into, without even really knowing, because I hadn't ever seen 64 before, I've heard about it, but I'd never really experienced 3D gaming. And then all of a sudden I go home with a system that I bought with my own money, so I felt very attached to it. This was my system. This was my first system I ever bought. And I put in that cart and I start playing Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. That's my first 3D gaming experience. I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it. And I know it might sound stupid to some of you, but it was just so much different to what I played North and South almost every day on the NES. I was in love with that game. A strategy, top-down type game with some side-scrolling elements to it, but it wasn't Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. That was such a huge leap. And obviously being a 13-year-old kid, fell madly in love with this game, finished it countless times, put countless hours into it, exploring every nook and cranny, trying to unlock everything, collect everything, be a part of everything. It was unlike anything else. That, in my opinion, was my first gaming experience, my first true gaming experience. What I love now, what I love doing with video games is diving into a new world. You name it, Horizon, Persona 5, Uncharted 4, whatever it is that takes me into this new world, this new experience that I can just get engrossed in. That's what I look for in gaming now. And it's because I had that experience with Zelda, and I've always tried to recreate that experience time and time and time again with other games. Some hit the mark, some don't. But you know what has always hit the mark? Zelda. Every new Zelda that comes out hits the mark for me. Maybe not some of the off spin type games like Triforce Heroes and stuff like that, but definitely every main title. I love Skyward Sword, and I know a lot of people who don't like Skyward Sword, but I can't help but love it so much because it's a main Zelda game, it's a Zelda adventure, the story was fantastic, but I just got dived back into a Zelda world like I was 13 years old again. So that was my first ever experience with Zelda. That was me discovering Zelda for the first time. The video game rental store down the road from me, independently owned, it was really cheap. It was like a few bucks, you could rent a game for a week. So we went down as soon as I had finished Ocarina of Time, I was like, I didn't seriously finished it like 3 times. I didn't want anything else. I didn't care about anything else. This was it for me. I actually went down to this video game store because I'd finished Zelda so many times I wanted something new. What I really wanted was something like Zelda. I remember asking the guy behind the counter, hey, what do you have like Zelda? What do you have? And he recommended 2 things. One was Quest 64, which I actually did pick up at this video game rental store, and I loved it at the time. You know, I was still 13 years old. I absolutely adored that game. It has a lot of great nostalgia for me. The game sucks. I know that now, but when you're a 13-year-old kid, that was a new adventure for me. I wasn't as good as Zelda, and I knew that at the time. No way it was near as good as Zelda, but it was definitely a new adventure. And the second thing he recommended to me, and again, guys, 13-year-old kid, right? Doesn't know anything about video games, just discovered Zelda for the first time. I'm like, what else can you recommend for me? And he says to me, well, of course, you know, there's the other Zelda game, Majora's Mask, if you haven't played that one yet. I can't. Like, just going back to that moment where I found out there was another one that was almost the same Christmas. 17 Christmases all at once in this one. There's one video game store, there's one video game store, and I was going home with Quest 64 and I was going home with Majora's Mask, and Majora's Mask is up there for me, like with Ocarina of Time as I always put Ocarina of Time as my favorite game purely because of the fact that I played it first and that awoke me into the world of gaming. But Majora's Mask is up there, like it's equal. I mean, it's equal. It blew me away. It was hard. I remember, I don't even know if I finished that one when I was a kid. I think it might have taken me a few years after that before I finally finished that game, but I played it a lot trying to finish it. It was just, that's a hard game. That's a really hard game. I remember it took me so long, and it's so easy now to figure out how to keep your rupees. You can do it almost right away, but back then I just couldn't figure out how to keep my rupees every time the game reset, and it was just frustrating me because I couldn't make any progress, and that's what I was stuck on for the longest time. I got stuck on so many things in that game, but I still loved it. I still adored it. I got frustrated, but I still absolutely adored it. So that was the start of gaming for me in general, not only just my Zelda story, and then it obviously grew from there. So then I was like, okay, this is what I want to do in my life. I want to play video games. And then I knew at that point that GameCube had come out, I think in like 2001 when I was 11 years old. So I knew GameCube had been out for a little while. So I was like, okay, I gotta pick this up now. I gotta get this system now. So I saved up some more money and I went and I bought a system with Lost Kingdoms 2 actually, which is one of my favorite games for the GameCube. Very underrated, always meant to review it, never got around to it. Another game where I went on a really cool adventure with a bunch of monsters. It's a really, check that game out if you haven't. And of course I picked up Winwaker, which I think came out that same year that I bought. I can't remember. But yeah, I remember I bought that at Game Traders as well. I went back and I'm like, all right, next Zelda, give it to me. Fell in love with Wind Waker. Fantastic game, amazing game. It felt like I was playing Ocarina of Time because I pretty much was, but you know, on the ocean, and I dived into that story, and the ending, I remember the ending blew me away, the way that you finish off Ganon. I feel like not giving spoilers about a game that's like 20 years old, not that old, but you know. And so I was, you know, at that point it was like solidified, this was gonna be the rest of my life. And then I heard the Wii was coming out, had that thing pre-ordered. My mom went and picked it up with Twilight Princess. I got it on Christmas with Red Steel, and I finished Twilight Princess. I sat down, I remember I had this big ass CRT TV, and I sat down and I finished Twilight Princess, and I loved that too. Honestly, for some reason, didn't enjoy it as much as Winwaker or Ocarina of Time. I wasn't huge on it. I've actually only finished it one time. I don't know why, that is the one. It's weird because so many people are obsessed with that one in general, but for some reason for me, it's just, it wasn't my favorite one. I absolutely loved it. I had a great, fantastic time. Had that exact feeling while I was playing it. But when I was finished, I did feel kind of done with it. I don't know why. But I picked it up on the Wii U and I started playing it again. Fell in love with it a second time. Still haven't finished that playthrough either. Sorry, Zelda. Because I don't know why, I'm just an idiot. Now, Skyward Sword, that was at a time where I wasn't doing too hot. I had moved out on my own. I'd been living with roommates, but it wasn't going too well. So I moved out on my own and I was struggling to pay rent on my own. And I remember the game came out, I had $100 left exactly. And the game I think was like $80 because we're talking Australia prices. And I went and bought it. I had 20 bucks to last me a week of groceries, and I had to go to work. So I was at work, you know, I'm getting really excited to go home and play this game, and then I realized right before break, I don't have Wii Motion Plus. I can't play this game, but the game store, I think it was Game Traders again. Game Traders and I have a Zelda history. They had that pack that came with the gold Wiimote, but it was an extra 20 bucks. Had Motion Plus though, so I could actually play the game when I went home, so I went ahead and bought that. And I lived that week on like rice and whatever it was I had left in the cupboard, cans of tuna. I ended up getting sick because I don't even know. I don't think it was because I wasn't eating enough, but probably. And I played that game sick in my bedroom. I remember I lined my couches up to the TV, and I just played that game for like 3 days straight until I finished, or 2 days straight until I finished it. I finished it pretty quick. I mean, I was just like literally, I just sat there and got up to like pee sometimes. I felt really sick, but I still had a fantastic time playing the game. Took my mind off my sickness. I really loved the game. I really loved the adventure. It did feel a little repetitive while I was playing it, but I didn't really mind because it's Zelda, and I always give Zelda a pass in my mind. You know, up until that point, there'd been a lot of extra additions into the Zelda franchise that I had picked up and played. The Game Boy Color games like Oracle of Seasons or Ages, I can't remember which one I played growing up, but I played one of them. Let me look over at my games here real quick. They're all in Australia, so I'm having trouble remembering about all the offspin. And then finally, recently, Breath of the Wild. I'm not even gonna bother going into detail about that too much. It was the same. It was exactly the same. I started playing that Zelda game just in the other room here in this house. It looked fantastic, sounded fantastic. I just had this another Zelda adventure. I love that game. I love that game so much. I mean, as far as, I think I enjoyed it more than Ocarina of Time. And that's such a weird thing to say, but I really, really, really love that game. And if it's not my favorite game of all time, it's only because of nostalgia for Ocarina of Time. That's putting Ocarina above it. But honestly, it's such a fantastic game. And once again, Zelda, and nothing ever beats it in my mind, because it's not only the fact that it's a fantastic game, which they all usually are, and Breath of the Wild definitely is. It's that I get hit with that 13-year-old nostalgia that reminds me why I'm a video gamer now. Which reminds me why I collect all of this stuff, why people go to conventions and bring me tons of Zelda gifts. It's because it's why I'm a gamer. It's why I do any of this. It's why I have a YouTube channel. It's why I'm talking to you guys. It's why I live the life I live. I mean, heck, the reason I'm in the States and in Canada is because of my YouTube channel taking me to the States one time. And the reason I started that was because I was a gamer, and the reason I'm a gamer is because of Zelda. It all goes back to Zelda. Everything always goes back to Zelda, and that's why I love it so much. Between all the main titles, the off-spins, the seasons, Oracle of Seasons and Ages, the 3DS games, the everything games, I've played pretty much all of them. Minish Cap, trying to think of all the random ones. I mean, I haven't played the CDI ones. I'm sure they're fantastic. I know they're not. And actually, I'm realizing now that I get all the way to the end of this video that I referenced a dark time, and another reason why I love Zelda so much. And I guess I'll touch on it real quick because this video is already so long, but I mean, I've told you guys before about the fact that I suffer from depression, and that actually started way back when I was super young. I had a really average childhood. That's a light way of putting it. I really wasn't allowed to leave my house or leave my bedroom or go anywhere or do anything with my life. And so I always isolated myself in my bedroom. I was always in my room. And you know, the NES, when I was growing up, that was always in the living room, and I was only allowed to go out there so many times in a day. So it sounds bad. I mean, trust me, childhood wasn't great. So I lived in my room most of the time, so getting that 64 in my room, it was like having a friend. I know that sounds kind of sad, but I didn't have friends. I wasn't allowed to have friends. So that was my friend. It was my way of escaping life, the way of escaping the life I didn't like and diving into a world that I did. And that was definitely something that got me through my last few years, or my last several years of childhood living in that house until I was 16 years old. It was always a way of escaping that. And even when, you know, I left and I wanted to avoid the responsibilities of life when I was 20 years old, or however old I was, and got Skyward Sword, it was still a way to escape that, to escape something that I wasn't happy with. And I mean, nowadays I'm doing much better. I'm much happier. I'm living a life I want to live. I'm finally in a position that I can afford to do what I want to do. But that doesn't mean that I don't love Zelda just as much. But that was definitely a big key factor in why I fell in love with gaming and Zelda so much. It was a way to escape, which I'm sure a lot of you can actually relate to. That's why a lot of us play video games. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just a way to escape and enjoy a different world for a while. Even if you like your life, it's fun to play something different. This video was way longer than I ever anticipated, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut that short. So on behalf of Zeldies here, and my Zelda posters, and this really blank part of the wall that I usually cover up with this thing, I would like to say a huge thank you to Casey for recommending this video and being a Patreon supporter. I'd like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for being so freaking awesome each and every day, each and every month. I'd like to thank all my subscribers for watching these videos. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna shut up. But I love you guys. I love Zelda. For the love of Zelda, leave a like. And for the love of Zelda, leave a comment down below with why you love Zelda, or even why you don't love Zelda. Screw it. I mean, it's whatever, really. May as well unsub.